The hallway fell silent the moment my father pointed at the front door. "You're done arguing," Richard Markle said, his voice cold enough to make my younger brother grin. "That bedroom belongs to Jason and Emily now." Jason slipped an arm around his fiancée and smiled like he'd already won. "Come on, Mary. We're getting married. You don't need the master suite." I tightened my grip on the bedroom key in my hand. I paid $65,000 toward buying this house. I moved into this room the day we closed. Why would I hand it over? My father didn't even look at me. "Because I said so." Jason shrugged. "You gave Dad money years ago. That doesn't make you the owner." "It wasn't a gift." "It doesn't matter what you call it," my father snapped. "My name is on the mortgage, my house, my rules." Behind them, Emily had already pulled out her phone and was measuring the walls for furniture. She spoke excitedly about where their king-sized bed would go, as though I had already disappeared. I stared at all of them. Not one person asked how I felt. Not one person questioned why the daughter who had sacrificed years of savings was suddenly being treated like an unwanted guest. "I am not giving up this room," I said quietly. My father's face hardened. "Then pack your things and get out." For several seconds, nobody moved. Then I slowly unlocked my bedroom door, walked inside, and began placing clothes into a suitcase. No yelling. No pleading. No tears. The silence made everyone uncomfortable. Jason kept expecting me to explode. Instead, I folded each shirt carefully while Emily awkwardly stepped away from the doorway, unsure whether to keep measuring the room. Dad folded his arms. "I hope you're finally learning that stubbornness has consequences." I zipped my suitcase shut and lifted it onto the floor. "I learned something today," I replied. He raised an eyebrow. "I learned exactly how much my sacrifices meant to this family. 3 years earlier, after my mother died, everything in our lives had changed. Dad had wanted to sell the house because he couldn't afford the down payment on a new place closer to his work. Jason had just started his career and had no savings. I had spent nearly a decade working as a financial analyst, saving every bonus, every overtime payment, every tax refund. When Dad admitted he was short by $65,000, I emptied the account I'd spent years building. "I'll help," I'd told him. He hugged me so tightly that day. "I'll never forget this, Mary. This home belongs to both of my children." I believed him. Because he was my father. Because promises made after burying your mother aren't supposed to become lies. After we moved into the house, I took the master suite only because Dad insisted. "You contributed the most," he'd said. "You've earned it." Jason had laughed back then. "Fine by me. I don't even live here." Apparently, time had rewritten everyone's memories except mine. Now Jason stood beside his fiancée, acting as though he'd always been entitled to the room I'd helped pay for. As I rolled my suitcase toward the front door, Dad didn't stop me. He didn't apologize. He simply held the door open. "Good luck," he said flatly. I stepped outside. The afternoon sun felt strangely warm against my face. The front door closed behind me with a click that sounded far louder than it should have. I loaded my suitcase into my car and sat behind the steering wheel for nearly a minute without starting the engine. Then I reached into my purse, scrolled through contacts I hadn't opened in years, and stopped on one name. Daniel Foster, the attorney who had handled the purchase of the house. My thumb hovered over the call button. I wasn't calling because I expected sympathy. I was calling because something suddenly didn't feel right. And if my memory was correct, my father had signed more than a mortgage the day we bought that house. I spent that night in the guest room of my longtime friend, Olivia's apartment. She didn't bombard me with questions the moment I walked through the door. She simply took my suitcase, handed me a cup of tea, and waited until I was ready. The silence was exactly what I needed. The next morning, she found me sitting at her kitchen table, staring at an old family photo on my phone. I still can't believe he actually threw you out, she said. I gave a tired smile. I can. She frowned. No, you expected him to favor Jason. You didn't expect him to throw away everything you sacrificed. She was right. Looking back, the warning signs had been there for years. After Mom died, I became the dependable one. If Dad needed help paying bills, he called me. If something broke around the house, I paid for repairs. When Jason lost jobs or spent beyond his means, Dad always found an excuse for him. He's still figuring life out, he'd say. Meanwhile, every overtime shift I worked disappeared into family expenses. I skipped vacations. I drove the same aging sedan, while my coworkers upgraded their lives. Every bonus check went into my savings account because I believed I was building something that would benefit all of us. When Dad found the perfect house, he admitted he couldn't complete the purchase. I've already fallen in love with it, he'd told me, but I'm $65,000 short. I remember sitting across from him at the bank. Take it. His eyes filled with tears. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You don't have to. He grabbed both my hands. This will always be your home too. One day, Jason will understand what you've done for this family. That promise echoed in my mind as I unpacked a small folder I'd managed to grab before leaving. I searched through every document I had. Bank statements, insurance papers, tax returns, closing cost receipts. But something was missing. The agreement. I distinctly remembered signing several documents besides the mortgage paperwork. Dad had signed them too. I checked every folder twice. Nothing. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I know I kept copies, I whispered. Olivia looked over. What? I had another folder. The one at the house. I nodded slowly. It stayed in the filing cabinet in my office. The office Jason probably emptied yesterday. The realization hit me all at once. Those papers hadn't simply disappeared. Someone had access to them after I left. Someone had every reason to make sure I couldn't find them. My phone suddenly rang. The screen displayed an unfamiliar office number. I answered immediately. Hello? Miss Markle. Yes. This is Daniel Foster. I sat upright. I received your voicemail yesterday. Thank you for calling me back. I remember your family's property purchase very clearly. My heartbeat quickened. You do. I do. There was a brief pause before he continued. I'm not comfortable discussing the details over the phone. I exchanged a glance with Olivia. Why? Because the documents involved contain legally protected information. I swallowed. So, there are documents. There are. My pulse pounded harder. I need you to bring a government-issued ID and come to my office tomorrow morning. Can you at least tell me one thing? Another short silence. Then his voice became unusually firm. I think your father forgot what he signed. The call ended. I slowly lowered my phone onto the table. Olivia stared at me. What did he say? I looked toward the window, where the morning sunlight suddenly felt very different than it had only moments earlier. He told me to bring my ID. And I took a slow breath. He thinks my father forgot what he signed. For the first time since Dad had pointed me toward the front door, I realized I might not have walked away with nothing after all. Chapter 1 complete. Hit Geo to continue. # Chapter 2. The next morning, before I even left Olivia's apartment, my phone buzzed repeatedly. Jason had made a public post. There he was, standing in the master suite with Emily, both of them smiling for the camera. Emily held up a ring of house keys, while Jason wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Officially moving into our new room, huge thanks to Dad for helping us start this next chapter together. Within minutes, the comments poured in. Congratulations. Richard, you're such an amazing father. Perfect wedding gift. Family always comes first. No one asked where I had gone. No one wondered why the room had suddenly become available. To everyone watching online, it looked like a generous father helping his son. I locked my phone and slipped it into my purse. Today wasn't about defending myself on social media. Today was about facts. Daniel Foster's office looked exactly as I remembered. The same framed certificates hung on the wall. The same receptionist smiled politely before asking for my identification. A few minutes later, Daniel welcomed me into his office. Mary. Mr. Foster. You can call me Daniel. He gestured toward a chair before opening a locked filing cabinet behind his desk. I had a feeling I'd see someone from your family again someday. He removed a thick file and placed it carefully on the desk. The folder looked untouched. Every tab was neatly labeled. Every page perfectly preserved. I maintain permanent records for transactions like these, he explained. I wasn't sure whether copies still existed. They do. He opened the folder to the property closing documents. I'd like you to read this. He turned the file toward me. There, near the bottom of the page, sat my father's unmistakable signature. Above it was a paragraph I hadn't seen in years. The contribution of $65,000 made by Mary Markle shall be recognized as an ownership investment and protected financial interest in the property. I blinked twice, then 3 times. This is the agreement your father requested we prepare before closing. My father requested it. Daniel nodded. He insisted your contribution be documented because he wanted your investment legally acknowledged. I stared at the page. So he always knew. He signed every page. Daniel reached into the folder again. There are witness signatures as well. He laid out another copy. Then another. Every one matched. Every signature was genuine. Every page confirmed the same thing. The money I'd contributed had never been treated as a gift. It had been formally protected. I leaned back, overwhelmed. For years, I believed I was simply helping him. You were helping him, Daniel replied calmly, but you were also protecting yourself. At least, that was the intention when these documents were drafted. I slowly closed my eyes. Then I remembered Jason's smiling photograph. The measuring tape. The new furniture. They truly believed none of this existed. Across town, Jason was already treating the house as if nothing could stop him. Emily ordered custom curtains for the master suite. Contractors measured the room for built-in shelving and fresh flooring. Boxes filled the hallway. Neighbors stopped by to congratulate them. Richard proudly gave tour of their new space. No one questioned whether he had the authority to give it away. Daniel slid a blank sheet of paper toward me. I have a recommendation. I'm listening. Don't argue with your father. I looked up. Really? Not yet. He folded his hands. If you confront him emotionally, he'll deny everything. What do you suggest? We respond professionally. He drafted a formal legal notice. It demanded that no ownership changes, renovations, refinancing, or transfers occur until the ownership interest was addressed. Every sentence was precise. Every word carried legal weight. When he finished, he looked at me. Once this is delivered, your father will understand the situation has changed. I nodded. Send it. The envelope arrived 2 days later. Richard happened to be hosting several relatives for Sunday lunch. Jason was enthusiastically showing everyone the renovated bedroom plans. Emily had fabric samples spread across the dining table. The doorbell rang. Richard accepted the certified envelope without concern. Probably another utility bill. He opened it casually. Then he stopped reading. His expression disappeared. The color drained from his face. Jason frowned. Dad. Richard quickly folded the papers. Everyone, give us a minute. One of my aunts looked confused. Is something wrong? Richard forced a smile that convinced no one. No, just everyone leave the room. Jason reached for the papers. What is it? Richard pulled them away. I said leave. For the first time since he'd thrown me out. My father looked genuinely afraid. Chapter 2 complete. Hit GO to continue. # Chapter 3. The legal notice changed everything. Less than 24 hours after it arrived, Daniel called me. Your father contacted my office. I set down my coffee. What did he say? He asked if we could have an informal conversation. No paperwork, no records. I wasn't surprised. And Daniel gave a small laugh. I declined. Of course you did. He insisted there had been a misunderstanding. I looked out the apartment window. There wasn't. No, Daniel agreed. There wasn't. 2 days later, Richard sat across from Daniel in a conference room. I wasn't there. Daniel later walked me through the meeting. He started by saying the agreement was old and probably didn't apply anymore. What did you tell him? I placed the signed document in front of him. Daniel tapped an imaginary page with his finger. I asked him if that was his signature. And he admitted it was. My chest tightened. So he couldn't deny it. No. What happened next? He claimed he never expected it to become an issue because he assumed you'd never challenge him. That sentence stayed with me all day. He assumed I'd never challenge him. Not because he believed he was right. Because he believed I would stay quiet. The consequences spread through the family faster than I expected. Jason called me that evening. For the first time in days, his confidence was gone. Mary. What? Can we talk? We're talking. He sighed heavily. I didn't know about those documents. I believe you. You do. I believe Dad kept you in the dark. There was a long silence. But you still accepted my bedroom without asking a single question. He had no answer. Finally, he whispered. I thought you were just being difficult. I wasn't protecting a bedroom. Another pause. I was protecting my investment. Within a week, the renovation company stopped all work. The project manager explained politely that ownership questions had to be resolved before they continued. Emily was furious. You've ruined everything. Jason rubbed his forehead. They won't continue until this is settled. The wedding is in 4 months. I know. Their carefully planned budget had depended on living in the house rent-free. Without that arrangement, they suddenly needed security deposits, rent payments, moving costs, and furniture expenses they hadn't planned for. One decision my father had made without thinking through the consequences was now affecting everyone. Meanwhile, relatives slowly learned pieces of the truth. One aunt called me. Mary, is it true you paid $65,000? Yes. I thought you just helped with a few expenses. No. Richard never told us. I know. Another uncle admitted the same thing. We honestly believed your father bought the house himself. One conversation after another shifted the family's understanding. People who had congratulated Richard only days earlier now questioned why he had thrown out the daughter who had helped make the purchase possible. Dad finally called me. His voice sounded older than I remembered. Mary. Hello. I think we should settle this privately. I've been trying to settle things privately for years. This doesn't need lawyers. It needed honesty. He ignored that. I'll let you move back in. I almost laughed. You think this is about the bedroom. No. It stopped being about the bedroom the moment you pointed at the door. Silence. Then he tried another approach. We're family. I was family when I gave you $65,000. Mary. I was family when I worked weekends so you could afford this house. Another silence. I was family when you promised it would always be my home. His breathing became heavier. I made mistakes. Yes. So withdraw the legal action. I answered without hesitation. No. A mediation meeting was scheduled. Richard arrived looking exhausted. Jason looked embarrassed. Emily barely spoke. Daniel organized several folders across the conference table. Richard tried one last time. We don't need to drag this any further. Daniel calmly opened another file. I believe we do. He removed a single document none of us had discussed before and placed it in the center of the table. Richard looked down. His shoulders immediately sank. Daniel folded his hands. This changes everything. The room fell completely silent. I looked at the document Daniel had placed on the table, but before I could read it, he turned it toward my father. Mr. Markle, he said evenly, would you like to explain this to your daughter? My father didn't reach for it. He simply stared. His hands, which had spent my entire childhood fixing broken bicycles and teaching me how to hold a hammer, were now trembling. What is it? I asked. Daniel answered. This is the written acknowledgement that accompanied the ownership agreement. He slid the paper toward me. It confirms that your $65,000 contribution was not a gift, not a loan, and not an act of charity. I lowered my eyes to the page. There it was. My father's signature. My own signature. Daniel's notarization. Every detail was exactly as it had been years ago. One sentence stood out above all the others. Both parties acknowledge that Mary Markle's contribution creates a protected financial interest in the property which cannot be ignored or eliminated through future occupancy decisions. I looked up slowly. So, when he threw me out, Daniel nodded. He ignored an agreement he personally requested and signed. No one spoke. Richard finally broke the silence. I never thought. His voice cracked. I never thought we'd end up here. I met his eyes. No. You always thought I'd stay quiet. He lowered his head. I did. For the first time in my life, my father admitted the truth without making excuses. I kept telling myself, you would forgive me like you always had. Jason covered his face with both hands. Dad. Richard looked toward him. I wanted to help you start your marriage. Jason shook his head. You could have helped me without taking something that wasn't yours to give. Emily sat silently beside him. The excitement she'd shown while measuring the master suite was gone. Reality had finally replaced assumption. Daniel spoke again. There are two paths forward. He calmly outlined them. The first is litigation. He paused. The second is a negotiated settlement recognizing Mary's ownership interest. Richard looked exhausted. How long would a lawsuit take? Potentially years. And the cost? Daniel named a figure that made everyone at the table fall silent again. Richard closed his eyes. I don't want this family destroyed. I answered quietly. It wasn't the lawsuit that damaged this family. He looked at me. It was the day you chose Jason over your own promise. Those words hung in the room longer than anything else that afternoon. After nearly an hour of discussion, Richard finally agreed to a settlement. His attorney reviewed every page. Daniel reviewed every revision. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was based on emotion. The agreement formally recognized my protected ownership interest and compensated me fairly for the investment I'd made years earlier. When we all stood to leave, my father hesitated. "Mary." I stopped. "I'm sorry." I searched his face. For once, he wasn't asking for something. He wasn't demanding obedience. He wasn't defending himself. He simply looked like a man, realizing that favoritism had cost him his relationship with his daughter. "I believe you're sorry," I said. "But that doesn't erase what happened." He nodded. "I know. Jason caught up with me in the parking lot. I owe you an apology too." "You do." I believed Dad because it was easier than asking questions. "I know. I should have remembered who helped buy that house." I smiled sadly. "I didn't help buy it, Jason." I looked back at the building one last time. "I invested in our future." He lowered his eyes. "I understand that now." Over the next several months, life changed in ways I never expected. Jason and Emily rented a modest apartment and learned to build their future on their own earnings instead of promises. They postponed several wedding expenses, but eventually planned a celebration they could genuinely afford. A few relatives called to apologize after learning the full story. Many admitted they had judged me without ever asking what had really happened. I accepted their apologies. Some relationships slowly healed. Others were too damaged to repair. Dad tried reaching out several times over the following year. Sometimes we shared coffee. Sometimes we talked about Mom. But we never pretended the past hadn't happened. Trust, once broken, takes much longer to rebuild than paperwork. As for me, the settlement became the foundation for something I'd never thought possible. I used it as the down payment on a beautiful home purchased entirely in my own name. The day I received the keys, I walked through every empty room by myself. No one could tell me which bedroom I deserved. No one could threaten to throw me out. Every wall represented years of sacrifice that had finally been honored. Standing in my new master bedroom, I placed the keys on the windowsill and smiled. Not because I'd won against my father, but because I'd finally stopped believing that protecting my family required sacrificing myself. The day my father pointed to the door, he thought he was throwing me out of my home. He never imagined he was opening the door to the strongest chapter of my life.